The studio was alive with energy. Lights glared down like miniature suns, reflecting off polished floors and casting sharp shadows on the polished panels. Cameras swiveled and clicked, microphones dangled from above, and the hum of technical equipment filled the air. Audience members murmured excitedly, leaning forward in anticipation. Everyone knew something was about to happen, something big, something tense. At the center of it all sat Jasmine Crockett, calm, composed, and ready. Across from her, Ivanka Trump adjusted her posture with that familiar, practiced poise. Her smile was measured, her eyes sharp, and for a moment, it felt like the entire room had paused, waiting for the first spark of conflict. The topic of the day was work-life balance, a subject both women had strong opinions about, though from very different perspectives. Jasmine represented the everyday struggle, the stories of people juggling demanding careers, childcare, and personal lives. She spoke from research, interviews, and lived experiences, her voice steady, her words deliberate. Ivanka brought a perspective shaped by privilege, opportunity, and strategic career planning. Her points were polished, her examples high-profile, her delivery confident. On paper, the discussion seemed like it could be respectful, even enlightening. In reality, the tension between them was palpable. Ivanka leaned forward suddenly, her voice carrying across the room like a bell. She asked a question loaded with implication, one meant to unsettle Jasmine and make her hesitate. It was sharp, pointed, and carried a hint of challenge. The audience sensed the tension immediately, leaning in as if they could physically feel the energy between the two women. For a moment, Jasmine paused, just slightly, measuring her response. But then she met Ivanka's gaze and nodded once. Her expression didn't betray any fear or frustration. Instead, it suggested readiness, calm control, and the quiet confidence of someone who had anticipated this exact moment. Jasmine answered thoughtfully, her words weaving a narrative that humanized the debate. She spoke of single parents working multiple jobs, of young professionals struggling to manage deadlines while caring for family, of people trying to build careers without sacrificing relationships. She didn't attack Ivanka personally. She didn't raise her voice or flinch. She simply laid out the reality that millions of Americans face every day. The room seemed to shift. The audience went silent, caught up in the vivid stories, the concrete examples, the quiet power of her delivery. Even the cameras seemed to linger a moment longer, capturing every reaction. Ivanka's expression changed subtly. There was the faintest flicker of surprise in her eyes, a brief hesitation that betrayed her initial plan. She had expected hesitation, maybe even a stammer, something to highlight contrast and make Jasmine appear inexperienced. Instead, she was met with precision, with clarity, and with calm authority. For a moment, the carefully constructed tension in the studio hung in mid-air, neither resolved nor fully confronted. It was the kind of pause that made everyone lean in, sensing something bigger was unfolding. Jasmine continued, her tone even but firm. She asked a question back, one that reframed the discussion entirely. She didn't challenge Ivanka personally, but she challenged the assumptions behind the question. The audience felt it instantly. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, as though everyone in the room was waiting for Ivanka to respond. For the first time, Ivanka was on the defensive, forced to reconsider how to continue the conversation without seeming dismissive or patronizing. As the dialogue unfolded, the contrast between their perspectives became clear. Jasmine's points were grounded in lived reality, in empathy, in observation. Ivanka's points were strategic, polished, and often focused on individual solutions over systemic ones. Both viewpoints had weight, but the dynamic in the room had shifted. What began as an attempt at subtle humiliation was now a genuine exchange of ideas. The cameras captured every slight raise of an eyebrow, every careful pause, every thoughtful glance, and the audience felt like they were witnessing something rare, an intelligent confrontation, not just a performance. The producers and crew were watching from behind the scenes, holding their breath. Even experienced staff who had seen thousands of broadcasts sensed the tension was different this time. The usual predictability of a live debate had been replaced by something uncertain, almost electric. It wasn't conflict for the sake of entertainment. It was a real exchange, and it demanded attention. The audience, too, seemed to sense it. Phones were raised discreetly to record. Eyes were wide, and even the usually fidgeting members sat still, absorbed. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, emphasizing a point about fairness and opportunity in the workplace. She spoke about how employers and leaders could support employees through flexible schedules, affordable childcare, and genuine recognition of personal needs. She didn't claim to have all the answers, but she articulated the challenges clearly and persuasively. It was practical, relatable, and grounded in the experiences of people viewers knew or recognized in their own lives. Ivanka responded, her voice measured, her tone courteous but firm. She acknowledged the points Jasmine raised while providing her own examples of structured routines, mentorship, and strategic prioritization. She spoke about the benefits of planning and delegation, about how thoughtful choices could help balance demanding careers with personal responsibilities. She didn't dismiss Jasmine's perspective, but she clearly aimed to steer the conversation towards solutions based on personal agency rather than systemic support. Even in this first segment of the debate, the audience could see the layers forming. On one side, empathy, realism, and systemic thinking. On the other, strategy, privilege, and individual initiative. Both sides were valid. Both sides had merit. The tension wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about how two different approaches could coexist and inform one another. And in that interplay, the true drama of the studio unfolded. As the first part of the discussion closed, there was a sense of anticipation that hung heavier than before. No one in the room wanted to blink or look away. Something had shifted, and it wasn't over yet. Jasmine had demonstrated composure under pressure, and Ivanka had been forced to recalibrate in real time. The cameras captured the subtle shifts in posture, the micro-expressions, the unspoken recognition that this was more than a debate. It was a moment of reflection, a rare exchange where ideas truly met. Even before the next segment began, the audience was left on edge. There was curiosity, anticipation, and the sense that the story wasn't about personal triumph, but about understanding perspectives, questioning assumptions, and engaging thoughtfully with ideas that affected everyday life. The stage was set, and everyone in the room, from the crew to the audience, knew that what came next could be even more revealing. In that first part of the debate, the hook was simple but powerful. What started as an attempt to humiliate had become a real conversation. Jasmine had turned a tense moment into a demonstration of intellect and calm confidence. Ivanka had been forced to confront a response she hadn't expected. The lights, the cameras, the audience, all were witness to a moment that was tense, dramatic, and ultimately thought-provoking. And as the studio prepared for the next round, one thought lingered in the air. This conversation was far from over, and the real story was just beginning. The cameras shifted angles, capturing the studio from new perspectives as the second part of the discussion began. The air still carried the tension from the first exchange, but now it had a sharper focus. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward slightly, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes steady. She began speaking not just as an individual, but as a voice for countless Americans who struggled to balance work, family, and personal life. Her words flowed clearly, each sentence painting a picture that was relatable, grounded, and hard to dismiss. She spoke about young parents working multiple jobs, often sacrificing sleep and personal time, trying to provide stability for their families while keeping their careers on track. The examples weren't abstract. They were real, tangible, people viewers could recognize in their own neighborhoods, offices, and homes. Ivanka Trump responded quickly, her voice smooth and polished. She acknowledged Jasmine's points but immediately shifted to her own perspective. She spoke of planning, efficiency, and strategy. She described her own routines, the careful delegation of tasks, and the systems she had used to manage high-pressure schedules. Her approach was confident and measured, framed as advice from experience rather than as criticism of those struggling. The contrast was striking. Jasmine emphasized the systemic and emotional challenges, while Ivanka highlighted personal discipline and practical solutions. The tension in the room wasn't about conflict, it was about perspective. Jasmine didn't back down. She addressed the point about personal strategy, agreeing that planning and organization could help, but she emphasized that not everyone had the same resources or support. She shared stories from ordinary Americans who were talented, hardworking, and ambitious, yet faced barriers like expensive childcare, rigid work hours, or lack of access to mentorship. She argued that systemic solutions, like flexible schedules, accessible childcare, and workplace policies that recognized human limits, were essential for people to succeed. Her voice remained calm but carried urgency, and the audience responded with quiet nods, leaning in to catch every word. Ivanka leaned back for a moment, listening carefully. She considered Jasmine's argument, then replied, acknowledging the importance of broader support systems, while reiterating her focus on personal agency. She spoke about mentorship programs, career planning workshops, and networking opportunities as ways to empower individuals. Her examples were familiar, aspirational, and polished, showing a path to success even within existing structures. While her points were compelling, there was a subtle tension. They relied on opportunities that not everyone had access to. The contrast was clear, and the studio felt it. As the discussion continued, the debate expanded naturally into deeper questions. Jasmine asked about fairness, opportunity, and equality. She posed questions like, what happens when hard work alone isn't enough? How can society ensure that ambition doesn't become a privilege only a few can afford? Ivanka answered with a mix of examples from her own experience and high-profile cases, showing how strategic thinking and careful planning could help people navigate challenges. She spoke with authority as someone who had faced scrutiny and expectations in a public eye, and she argued that cultivating resilience, building networks, and learning to delegate were essential skills in any competitive environment. The exchange was fast-paced. Each woman spoke clearly, concisely, and with intent. There were no long-winded explanations, no filler words. The audience could follow every argument, every counterpoint, and every nuance. Both perspectives were given space to breathe, and the viewers could see the complexity rather than a simplistic right versus wrong debate. Jasmine brought emotion and empathy. Ivanka brought strategy and structure. Together, their dialogue reflected the challenges millions faced in modern American life. How to balance ambition with personal responsibilities. How to succeed while maintaining family connections. How to navigate systems that were sometimes supportive, sometimes indifferent. Jasmine illustrated her points with vivid, relatable scenarios. She spoke of Maria, a single mother in Texas, juggling 3 jobs while caring for her 2 children. Maria had talent, determination, and ambition, yet she struggled to find reliable childcare and flexible hours. Jasmine contrasted that with Mark, a young professional in New York working 60-hour weeks while caring for an elderly parent. She painted their lives with detail and care, emphasizing that these weren't just statistics, they were real human experiences. The audience responded subtly, with murmurs and quiet nods, recognizing themselves or people they knew in those stories. Ivanka countered with stories of strategic problem-solving. She spoke about individuals who had used mentorship, networking, and careful planning to navigate career challenges. She described initiatives that allowed employees to optimize their time and energy, showing how structured approaches could help balance work and life demands. Her examples were aspirational, intended to inspire and guide, and her tone was calm and authoritative. The contrast between Jasmine's empathy-driven approach and Ivanka's strategy-driven advice created a dynamic tension in the studio, keeping viewers engaged and curious. The dialogue wasn't adversarial. It was a conversation that demanded reflection. Jasmine challenged assumptions without attacking Ivanka personally, and Ivanka defended her perspective without dismissing the realities Jasmine presented. Both women were experts in their own way. Jasmine as someone attuned to societal trends and systemic issues, Ivanka as someone familiar with public expectations, personal branding, and structured strategies for high-pressure environments. Together, they represented 2 sides of the same challenge, navigating modern life while balancing personal ambition and external responsibilities. The pace of the discussion increased as they exchanged points, each rebuttal built on the last, creating a rhythm that was both compelling and informative. The audience could feel the stakes without any shouting or drama. The tension was intellectual, emotional, and relatable. They weren't watching a confrontation. They were watching ideas collide, merge, and evolve. The cameras captured every detail. The subtle nods, the glances, the thoughtful pauses, and the quick retorts that kept the energy high. By the end of this segment, the studio had transformed. What began as a simple debate about work-life balance had evolved into a nuanced discussion about opportunity, strategy, empathy, and fairness. Viewers at home could reflect on their own lives, considering which perspective resonated more with their experience, or how both approaches could coexist. It wasn't a moment of victory or defeat. It was a moment of insight. Jasmine had highlighted the human and systemic side. Ivanka had emphasized structure and personal strategy, and together they had created a discussion that encouraged thought, reflection, and curiosity. Even as the cameras zoomed out and the producers signaled the transition to the next segment, the energy lingered. The audience was attentive, engaged, and visibly affected by the dialogue. The studio felt alive, not with drama, but with the intensity of ideas meeting in real time. Both women had held their ground, presented their perspectives, and shown that respectful debate could be both entertaining and enlightening. The stakes weren't personal. They were about understanding modern life, recognizing challenges, and exploring solutions from multiple angles. By the time the segment concluded, viewers had seen more than just contrasting opinions. They had witnessed a model of balanced discussion. Jasmine's empathetic approach made the struggles of ordinary Americans tangible, while Ivanka's strategic advice offered practical steps for navigating challenges. The contrast wasn't designed to humiliate or dominate. It was a reflection of reality. Life is complex, solutions are multifaceted, and no single perspective can cover it all. The audience left the first half of the debate thinking, questioning, and reflecting. Exactly what a thoughtful conversation is meant to do. The energy in the studio had reached a new peak as the third segment of the discussion began. The cameras adjusted to capture both women in a tighter frame, emphasizing the intensity in their expressions. Jasmine Crockett sat upright, her calm composure a sharp contrast to the tension in the air. Ivanka Trump leaned slightly forward, her smile polite but calculated, signaling that she was about to attempt something more pointed. The audience could sense it. Something was about to happen, a moment designed to spark reaction. Every staff member behind the cameras held their breath. The silence in the studio almost physical. Ivanka spoke first, her voice smooth and slightly ironic. She posed a question framed as advice, but it carried a subtle undertone meant to challenge Jasmine's credibility. The question implied that Jasmine's perspective was naive, that her ideas were simplistic, and that she might not fully understand the realities of navigating high-pressure environments. It was a deliberate attempt to unsettle, to create hesitation, to gain an upper hand. The words landed in the room like a small ripple, and for a second, the audience waited for Jasmine to stumble, for a pause, for any sign of faltering. Jasmine didn't flinch, not even a fraction. Her eyes met Ivanka's, steady and unwavering, and for a moment the tension hung in the air like a held breath. Instead of reacting defensively, Jasmine leaned in slightly, her hands clasped lightly on the table, and spoke with a calm authority that immediately shifted the dynamic. She reframed the question, turning it into an opportunity to highlight both sides of the debate. Her response was precise, deliberate, and compelling, showing insight, empathy, and intelligence without attacking Ivanka personally. The room shifted. The audience leaned in. The silence became noticeable, a collective focus on the dialogue unfolding. What happened next was subtle but powerful. Ivanka, who had expected hesitation or uncertainty, was caught off guard. For 14 seconds, her carefully planned strategy to assert dominance backfired. Jasmine's answer wasn't just accurate, it was relatable, emotionally resonant, and backed by examples that the viewers at home could immediately connect with. She spoke of everyday Americans navigating challenges that required more than personal discipline. She shared short, vivid stories of parents, caregivers, and professionals who were doing their best despite systemic barriers. Her tone was calm, her words clear, and her delivery confident, which made the studio audience feel both the weight and the truth of her perspective. Ivanka's expression shifted subtly. At first there was surprise, a quick flicker in her eyes. Then came a faint tension around her mouth, a brief hesitation that betrayed her realization that her intended point of dominance had failed. For 14 seconds, she was visibly recalibrating, trying to determine how to respond without losing composure. The audience noticed it immediately. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged glances. The moment was rare and unplanned, a genuine display of human reaction in a setting often dominated by rehearsed lines and polished gestures. Jasmine continued without pause, deepening her argument. She emphasized the importance of empathy, systemic understanding, and real-world solutions. Her words painted the complexities of modern life in vivid strokes. Families struggling to balance jobs and childcare, young professionals facing burnout, and communities dealing with unequal access to opportunities. She spoke without anger or condescension, but with clarity that forced even the most strategic arguments to confront reality. Her delivery was steady, engaging, and carefully measured to resonate with both the audience in the studio and those watching at home. Ivanka responded, but her words were slower, more cautious than before. She tried to pivot, acknowledging the challenges Jasmine described while subtly bringing the conversation back to strategy, efficiency, and personal planning. She spoke of routines, mentorship, and structured approaches to career and personal growth. But her tone had changed. Gone was the confident, slightly condescending edge she had started with. Now there was caution, an awareness that the moment had slipped out of her control and that the audience had recognized Jasmine's poise and clarity. The interplay between them became electric. Jasmine's calm confidence contrasted sharply with Ivanka's cautious recalibration, creating a rhythm that was compelling to watch. The tension was no longer about personal dominance. It was about ideas, perspectives, and how real-world challenges could be addressed from multiple angles. The audience felt it, sensing that this wasn't just a debate. It was a demonstration of intellect, empathy, and communication under pressure. Each word mattered, each pause was loaded with meaning, and every glance hinted at unspoken acknowledgement of the moment's significance. Jasmine then framed her next point with precision, focusing on how systemic support and individual strategy could coexist. She argued that while personal planning and discipline were important, they could only go so far without broader societal support. She spoke about workplace flexibility, community programs, and accessible resources that could help people thrive. Her examples were short, vivid, and emotionally engaging, designed to make the concepts tangible. The audience responded with subtle reactions, nods, quiet murmurs, attentive posture, showing that her points were landing effectively. Ivanka listened intently, choosing her words carefully. She acknowledged the importance of support systems and agreed that systemic change could improve lives. But she gently emphasized personal agency, reminding viewers that strategy, focus, and self-discipline were also critical components of success. Her points were thoughtful and articulate, but the energy had shifted. Where she had initially controlled the flow, she now responded to Jasmine's framing, adjusting in real time. It was a rare glimpse of adaptability, and the audience sensed the subtle power shift. The 14-second moment became a turning point. It wasn't dramatic in the sense of shouting or confrontation, but it was dramatic in the intellectual and emotional sense. Jasmine had turned an attempted humiliation into a showcase of clarity, empathy, and confidence. Ivanka, momentarily caught off guard, had to reconsider her approach and respond with genuine engagement rather than theatrics. The audience was captivated. They weren't watching a viral conflict. They were witnessing a real exchange of ideas where intellect and empathy triumphed over performative gestures. As the discussion continued, the rhythm between the two women stabilized. Jasmine maintained her calm, thoughtful presence, building on her earlier points and emphasizing practical, empathetic solutions. Ivanka balanced strategy with acknowledgement, offering practical advice while recognizing the human element in Jasmine's examples. The debate had evolved into a dialogue, each woman enhancing the other's perspective and creating a more complete picture of the challenges Americans faced in balancing career, family, and personal goals. By the end of this segment, the audience was deeply engaged. They had witnessed the subtle shift in dynamics, the way a carefully planned moment could be transformed by composure, intelligence, and empathy. Jasmine had not only defended her perspective but had elevated the conversation, making it about understanding and problem-solving rather than personal victory. Ivanka's measured responses reinforced that even privileged positions could recognize and respect different realities. The cameras captured the subtle details, a fleeting look of surprise, a slight pause, the careful word choice that followed, and the unspoken acknowledgement of the impact of the moment. Viewers watching at home could feel the tension and relief simultaneously. The exchange had demonstrated that respect, thoughtfulness, and calm confidence could turn potential humiliation into opportunity, and that ideas, when presented clearly and empathetically, could hold power over performance alone. The studio felt different as the segment concluded. The audience sat in reflective silence, the energy less tense but more thoughtful. The moment wasn't about winning. It was about engagement, insight, and understanding perspectives that might differ from their own. The stage had been set for the next part of the discussion, and everyone present knew that the conversation had moved beyond performative gestures into something substantive, meaningful, and memorable. The final segment of the discussion opened with a sense of anticipation. The energy in the studio was calmer than before, but it carried a reflective weight. The audience had absorbed the exchanges between Jasmine Crockett and Ivanka Trump, and now everyone waited to see how the conversation would close. Cameras moved smoothly, capturing the subtle expressions, the unspoken reactions, and the delicate balance of respect and tension that had defined the previous moments. Jasmine sat upright, composed, her calm demeanor unwavering, while Ivanka adjusted her posture slightly, signaling focus and attentiveness rather than confrontation. The stage was set for a conclusion that would leave an impression beyond mere debate. Jasmine began by summarizing her core points with clarity and brevity. She emphasized that work-life balance wasn't simply about individual choices. It was about understanding the realities that millions of Americans face daily. She spoke of parents juggling multiple responsibilities, young professionals trying to maintain careers while supporting family members, and individuals striving to meet personal ambitions in systems that often demanded perfection. Her words were precise, relatable, and emotionally resonant. The audience leaned in, recognizing fragments of their own lives, workplaces, and communities in her descriptions. Every sentence she spoke reinforced the idea that thoughtful policies, empathy, and systemic understanding were essential components of a fair and functional society. Ivanka responded thoughtfully, her tone measured and reflective. She acknowledged Jasmine's points, showing genuine consideration rather than dismissal. She spoke about the role of planning, strategy, and resourcefulness, highlighting that while systemic support was vital, personal choices and preparation could significantly influence outcomes. She shared examples of structured routines, mentorship programs, and practical methods individuals could use to navigate career and family demands. Her approach wasn't confrontational. It was an invitation to consider how both personal initiative and societal structures could complement each other. The contrast between Jasmine's empathetic realism and Ivanka's strategic practicality framed a balanced discussion, giving the audience multiple lenses through which to view the issue. As the conversation progressed, the two women began to build on each other's points rather than challenge them. Jasmine suggested that while personal planning was valuable, it often fell short when systemic obstacles existed. Ivanka added that understanding one's own strengths, creating support networks, and seeking mentorship could amplify the benefits of systemic solutions. The dialogue became cooperative, almost symphonic, as both women demonstrated that differing perspectives could enhance understanding rather than create division. The audience noticed this shift, where the first moments had carried tension and anticipation. Now there was a sense of clarity and insight, a mutual respect that underscored the entire exchange. The discussion turned to practical applications. Jasmine highlighted how workplaces could implement policies that supported employees without compromising efficiency. Flexible schedules, access to childcare, mental health resources, and realistic expectations for productivity. She explained that such measures weren't just beneficial for employees. They also improved morale, retention, and overall performance. Ivanka agreed, adding that employees who were proactive, organized, and strategic in their work habits could leverage these policies most effectively. She emphasized that neither approach alone was sufficient. Progress required a combination of individual initiative and systemic support. The audience absorbed the nuance, recognizing that the conversation was about solutions rather than conflict. Jasmine then shifted to a broader perspective, discussing cultural expectations around work and family. She spoke about societal pressures, gender norms, and the unspoken expectations placed on individuals in professional and personal spheres. She emphasized that creating equitable opportunities wasn't only about policy, but also about changing attitudes, encouraging empathy, and fostering collaboration in communities, workplaces, and families. Ivanka responded by highlighting examples of mentorship, structured guidance, and role modeling, showing that individuals could influence culture positively by demonstrating balance, accountability, and foresight. Together, they painted a picture of a multifaceted approach that combined systemic change with personal effort, appealing to viewers seeking practical advice grounded in real experiences. The conversation naturally flowed into reflections on leadership. Jasmine spoke about the importance of empathy in leadership, the ability to understand others' challenges, and the value of listening to diverse perspectives. She argued that leaders who ignored systemic barriers risked alienating employees, undermining team cohesion, and missing opportunities for innovation. Ivanka emphasized strategic leadership, the value of planning, delegation, and setting examples through personal discipline. She argued that leaders who modeled effective time management, decision-making, and goal-oriented behavior could inspire and guide others, creating systems that were resilient and productive. Both points were valid, and the audience could see how they complemented each other, forming a holistic understanding of effective leadership in modern life. The dialogue then became introspective. Jasmine reflected on the moment when Ivanka had attempted to unsettle her earlier, noting that it was a reminder that respectful communication, clarity of thought, and composure could transform challenging interactions into opportunities for meaningful discussion. Ivanka acknowledged the lesson, subtly recognizing that attempts to dominate a conversation could backfire, and that listening deeply, responding thoughtfully, and respecting differing perspectives could strengthen dialogue rather than weaken it. The exchange was subtle, almost unspoken, but the audience noticed the shift. This wasn't about victory or humiliation anymore. It was about learning, adapting, and growing through conversation. As the segment drew to a close, both women focused on actionable insights. Jasmine highlighted that individuals should seek balance, understand systemic limitations, and advocate for supportive structures in workplaces and communities. Ivanka emphasized that personal strategy, mentorship, and disciplined planning could maximize the benefits of these supportive systems. Together, their discussion offered a dual approach, one that combined empathy, awareness, and systemic solutions with strategy, preparation, and personal initiative. The studio audience nodded in unison, visibly engaged and reflective, as they processed the depth and practicality of the conversation. The final moments were marked by quiet reflection. Jasmine smiled softly, her tone warm and reassuring as she encouraged viewers to consider both empathy and strategy in their own lives. Ivanka returned the gesture, acknowledging the value of listening, adapting, and collaborating with others who might see the world differently. Cameras captured the mutual respect in their posture, the subtle understanding in their expressions, and the unspoken acknowledgement that this conversation had transcended initial tension to become a meaningful exchange. Even as the lights dimmed slightly and the audience prepared to leave, the impact lingered. The discussion had moved beyond the initial hook of confrontation to explore broader societal, personal, and practical themes. Viewers had been presented with multiple perspectives, clear examples, and actionable insights. The story wasn't about conflict. It was about understanding, reflection, and the balance between individual effort and systemic support. Both women had contributed, both had adapted, and both had elevated the conversation in ways that were instructive, engaging, and memorable. The cameras slowly panned out, capturing the studio as a whole. The energy was thoughtful rather than tense, reflective rather than performative. Jasmine and Ivanka's discussion had transformed the space into a live classroom on modern life challenges, showcasing how debate could be constructive, insightful, and inspiring. The audience left with ideas to consider, conversations to continue, and perspectives to explore. Understanding that complex problems required multifaceted solutions, open dialogue, and mutual respect. By the end of Part 4, the story had reached its natural conclusion. The attempt at humiliation, the tension, and the fast-paced exchanges had evolved into a cooperative, reflective, and thought-provoking dialogue. Viewers were left not with a sense of drama or conflict, but with a sense of clarity, insight, and practical takeaways for navigating the complexities of modern American life. The narrative had fulfilled its purpose: to educate, engage, and encourage reflection while staying respectful, balanced, and suitable for a wide audience.